believe the worst 1980s TV spin-offs existed, and you never even knew about them? These TV spin-offs tried to ride the wave of our favorite shows, hoping to matter. But if they were part of the decade, why did we forget them so easily? So picture this. You are sitting down in front of the television, it is 1980, and the world still has not quite figured out what it wants from action comedy. Out of nowhere, some genius decides to spin off a show about a trucker and his monkey into a police procedural. No, seriously, that is what the Misadventures of Sheriff Lobo became. The original show, BJ and the Bear, had a fun-loving energy. A young guy driving a big red truck with his pet chimpanzee, fighting crime and dodging corrupt cops in the Deep South. America did not just eat it up, they loved it. It had charisma, it had charm, and it had a monkey in a truck. Then came The Misadventures of Sheriff Lobo. A spin-off that decided what people really wanted was the villain. Sheriff Lobo, the crooked small-town sheriff, gets his own series. They thought the key to success was giving the bad guy from the last show a redemption arc, a new job, and a badge that actually meant something this time. They even rebranded him into a somewhat heroic figure and moved him into the big city to work with the state police. And in case you are wondering, yes, it completely tanked the entire vibe. The action was stale. The jokes missed the mark. The monkey? Gone. Everything that made the original special was scrubbed clean in favor of a by-the-numbers cop show. Fans of BJ and the Bear were left scratching their heads. What happened to the goofy charm? Where did all the fun go? Critics panned it. Ratings dropped faster than a rig on a mountain pass. It was like asking for another slice of birthday cake and being handed a cold meatloaf instead. And the worst part? Nobody really remembers it now. If you mention The Misadventures of Sheriff Lobo today, you are probably going to be met with blank stares. But this show did exist. It aired for 2 whole seasons. 2. This was not just a bad pilot. They really committed to this thing. Maybe that is what makes it so unforgettable now. Not because it succeeded, but because it spectacularly missed what made the original great. And in doing so, it became a time capsule of what television thought people wanted in 1980 and got completely wrong. Now this one feels like an urban legend, a strange little program that wandered into television history, made a mess, and quietly vanished without anyone noticing. But yes, the Checkerboard Lounge had a television spin-off in 1983. Inspired by the legendary Chicago blues club of the same name, this show was supposed to be the next big thing in urban variety entertainment. Instead, it became one of the most obscure footnotes in music television. What the producers wanted was clear. They wanted cool. They wanted edge. They wanted blues. The original Checkerboard Lounge, after all, was where the Rolling Stones and Muddy Waters once shared a stage. It had real roots, real soul. But the television version? It felt like a karaoke bar trying to impersonate history. It was a half-music, half-talk format that tried to bottle the gritty, smoky vibe of a live club and pour it onto a budget studio set with washed-out lighting and second-tier guest stars. Instead of dynamic performances, you got half-hearted jam sessions. Instead of thoughtful interviews, you got awkwardly edited conversations that sounded like they were taking place during sound checks. It was supposed to be raw and real, but it felt staged and sanitized. People who tuned in expecting a fusion of culture, music, and storytelling got a confused mix of blues-light performances and corny banter. Maybe the weirdest thing about the Checkerboard Lounge spin-off is how little anyone talked about it after it aired. There were no reruns, no revival campaigns, no cult fan base digging up old VHS tapes. It just faded away. And unless you were sitting on your couch in 1983 watching late-night TV with an antenna on your roof, chances are you would have no idea it even existed. And maybe that is the lesson here. You cannot fake soul. And no matter how good your name recognition is, if you do not bring something real to the table, audiences will walk away. Just like they did in 1983. What happens when you take one of the most beloved, wholesome families in American sitcom history and throw them into a full-blown soap opera? You get the Bradys, and it is every bit as weird as it sounds. By 1990, nostalgia was everywhere. The Brady Bunch had already enjoyed a few revivals, made for television movies and even animated spin-offs. But this one was different. The Bradys was not about fun. It was not about charm. It was about drama, and lots of it. In this reboot, the original Brady kids are all grown up, raising families of their own and dealing with the darkest plots you could imagine for a Friday night. Marcia is an alcoholic. Bobby is paralyzed in a car crash. Jan cannot have children, and the tone, bleak. Gone were the pastel kitchens and goofy laugh tracks. In their place were tense arguments, dramatic piano music, and plot lines that felt like they were borrowed from Days of Our Lives. It is honestly hard to believe this was made by the same people who brought you pork chops and applesauce. The entire thing felt like a bizarre social experiment. Like the network sat down and said, "Hey, what if we ruin everyone's childhood?" And the Bradys did just that. Audiences were stunned. This was not what they signed up for. It was like turning on Full House and watching Danny Tanner get arrested. Sure, times had changed, but the charm of the Brady Bunch was that it existed in a bubble. A safe, groovy, bell-bottomed bubble. And this reboot? It popped that bubble with a rusty needle and left viewers wondering what just happened. The show only lasted 6 episodes. 6. It was slotted into prime time on Friday nights, but it just could not compete. Fans of the original were too weirded out, and new viewers had no idea why they were supposed to care about these characters. It was neither soap opera enough for soap fans, nor Brady enough for Brady fans. So it crashed. Hard. And now, the Bradys lives on, only in awkward retrospectives and bootleg YouTube uploads. But for anyone who watched it in real time, the memory lingers. The laughless laughs. The moody lighting. The sense that something sacred had been tampered with. Some spin-offs fade quietly. But this one made noise. And not the good kind. You ever get the feeling someone told the punchline before the setup even finished? That is The Ropers in a nutshell. This spin-off came from Three's Company, one of the most chaotic and wildly popular sitcoms of the late 1970s. People tuned in every week to watch Jack Tripper fake his way through a double life, supported by roommates and nosy landlords. And speaking of landlords, that is where Stanley and Helen Roper came in. They were the nosy, mismatched, constantly bickering couple who somehow stole every scene they were in. So naturally, someone at the network thought, what if we gave them a show? And thus, The Ropers was born. Only problem? You took away Jack. You took away the apartment antics. You took away the original spark. And what you were left with was arguing. Just arguing. The entire show revolved around Stanley being cheap and clueless, and Helen being desperate for literally any form of affection. It tried to recreate the nagging charm they had on Three's Company, but without anyone to bounce off of, it just fell flat. The laughs felt forced. The writing felt slower. And worst of all, the chemistry that made them so entertaining in small doses now felt stretched way too thin. It is the classic case of taking side characters and giving them center stage, only to realize they were never meant to carry the spotlight. To make matters worse, the show was awkwardly slotted into the schedule and kept getting bounced around in time slots. Audiences lost interest fast. After just 2 seasons, it was gone. And get this, the Ropers lasted just long enough to ruin the actors' chances of returning to Three's Company. That's right, they missed their window. By the time the spin-off failed, Three's Company had already moved on. So you ended up with 2 shows, one struggling without its landlords and another crashing without its tenants. A true lose-lose. These days, hardly anyone brings up the Ropers. But back then, it was everywhere for a minute. Just long enough to prove that some characters shine best on the sidelines. And once you try to stretch that magic into a full 22 minutes, you risk watching the whole thing unravel, one canned laugh at a time. If you ever wanted to watch a sci-fi show crash and burn faster than a viper in a dogfight, Galactica 1980 is your show. This was the follow-up to Battlestar Galactica, one of the most ambitious, visually striking science fiction dramas of its era. Fans loved it. Sure, it was campy. Sure, it borrowed a little too heavily from Star Wars, but it had heart, ambition, and a killer soundtrack. Then came the spin-off, and it was like someone pulled the plug out of the space-time continuum. Galactica 1980 picked up the story years later, after the Battlestar finally found Earth. Sounds epic, right? Except instead of exploring space or expanding the lore, they decided to crash land in 1980s Los Angeles. Literally. That is the whole show. Time travel hijinks, kids on flying motorcycles, and awkward attempts at blending futuristic soldiers with modern Earth. The budget? Slashed. The original cast? Mostly gone. And what replaced them was a watered-down version of the original, packed with weird plot devices like invisibility, child prodigies, and bad wigs. It was like Battlestar Galactica went from being space opera to Saturday morning cartoon overnight. Fans were devastated. They had waited for more of the original show, more battles, more Cylons, more survival. What they got instead was a fish-out-of-water sitcom in space boots. And to make matters worse, the network slapped it into a family-friendly slot, neutering any edge or danger the original had. Even the Cylons, the terrifying robotic villains, were barely used. You know it is bad when the scariest thing in your sci-fi show is a budget cut. Only 10 episodes aired before the network pulled the plug. The ratings dropped like a meteor. And for years, Galactica 1980 became the go-to punchline for what not to do with a beloved franchise. It is a shame, really, because beneath the goofy writing and budget costumes, you could still sense the bones of something meaningful, something that wanted to work. But it never got the time or the talent to get off the ground. For every good sci-fi comeback story, there is one that never clears orbit. This one barely made it off the launch pad. Now this one hurts a little, because Gloria came from television royalty. We are talking about All in the Family, one of the most groundbreaking sitcoms in American history. It tackled racism, politics, gender roles. Nothing was off limits. And at the heart of it all was Archie Bunker and his fiery daughter, Gloria. Played by Sally Struthers, Gloria was smart, outspoken, emotional, and absolutely unforgettable. So when producers pitched a show centered around her, people were excited. What would it look like to see Gloria out in the world on her own? The answer? Surprisingly dull. Gloria followed her after separating from her husband, Mike, also known as Meathead, and moving back to New York with her young son. On paper, that sounds like a fresh start. But in practice, it felt like a spin-off with the soul vacuumed out. Archie was gone, Edith was gone, Mike was gone, and in their place, Gloria got a new job at a veterinarian clinic. Yes, a vet clinic. The show leaned hard into her being a single working mom, but it never found the spark or grit that made the original character shine. Instead of biting social commentary, we got sitcom fluff. Instead of memorable side characters, we got one-note co-workers and forced laugh tracks. Sally Struthers gave it her all. That much is clear. But the scripts just did not give her anything to work with. It was like the writers forgot who Gloria even was. Or maybe they were too afraid to let her be as complex and confrontational as she had been on All in the Family. Either way, audiences tuned out fast. The show barely made it through one season before getting the axe. And these days, Gloria lives in the shadows of its parent series, often left out of retrospectives entirely. Which is kind of tragic, because Gloria was more than a supporting character. She was the moral compass of All in the Family. But stripped from that world and sanitized for mainstream appeal, the show just fell flat. Spin-offs are tricky like that. You can take the character out of the chaos, but if you take away everything that made them matter, what is left? Apparently, just a half-hour slot people forgot existed. If you thought the wild world of the Dukes of Hazzard needed less car chases and more awkward Southern manners, then Enos was the spin-off for you. And I say that with all the confusion it deserves. Enos Strait, the good-natured, painfully polite deputy from Hazzard County, was not exactly what you would call spin-off material. He was lovable, sure, but giving him a whole series felt like handing the class hall monitor their own movies. So what did Enos do after leaving the high-octane nonsense of Hazzard? He joined the Los Angeles Police Department. Yep, the guy who once wrestled pigs in the backwoods was now patrolling the streets of downtown LA. That is not a joke. That is the premise. It was supposed to be fish-out-of-water comedy. A simple man with a big heart trying to adjust to the big city while solving crimes and maintaining his small-town charm. But here is the thing. The Dukes of Hazzard worked because it was chaotic. It had moonshine runs, corrupt sheriffs, and cars flying over barns every 5 minutes. Enos? It had paperwork, tame mysteries, a whole lot of polite stammering. The action was gone, the chemistry was gone, and it felt like the writers were holding back every second, afraid to let the show get weird or funny or even mildly exciting. Even the theme song was soft and slow, like a lullaby for canceled potential. And the worst part? Enos deserved better. As a side character, he was endearing and sweet, but isolated and center stage, he became a caricature of himself. You can only watch so many episodes of a wide-eyed deputy accidentally solving crimes with good intentions before you realize there is nothing more coming. The show lasted just 1 season. It quietly disappeared from the network's radar and never got a real send-off. Most fans of the Dukes of Hazzard do not even realize it existed. That is how deep it sank. So what went wrong? Maybe it was the lack of stakes, or the absence of the Duke family antics. Or maybe, just maybe, not every lovable character is meant to carry their own show, especially when the whole concept feels like it was drawn up in a last-minute pitch meeting. Either way, Enos never got the traction it needed, and like a slow cruiser on the freeway, it was quickly passed and forgotten. If you ever watched Cheers and thought, you know who I want to follow home? Carla's deadbeat ex-husband? Then congratulations, you were the exact person the Tortellis was made for. For everyone else, it was a confusing, offbeat attempt to wring comedy out of a character no one asked to see again. Nick Tortelli was never meant to be a main event. He was sleazy. He was clueless. He was a punchline. And that is exactly where he worked best, as a punchline. But in 1987, someone decided he deserved his own show. They took Nick, stuck him in Las Vegas with his new wife Loretta, and tried to build a sitcom around his incompetence and sleazy charm. The result? A lot of yelling, a lot of awkward silences, and a whole lot of wondering who greenlit this mess. The show tried to mix the wit of Cheers with the chaos of family sitcoms, but it failed to capture either. Nick's kids hated him. Loretta was played for dumb blonde laughs, and every episode felt like it was waiting for a joke that never came. It was almost painful watching these characters struggle through plots that seemed like discarded drafts from other, better shows. And then there was the tone. Cheers worked because it had warmth. It had community. Even when characters fought or made mistakes, there was a heart underneath it all. The Tortellis? It was mean. Loud. Empty. Like a knockoff handbag that falls apart the second you unzip it. Critics were brutal. Audiences tuned out after the pilot, and NBC quickly realized their mistake. After just 13 episodes, The Tortellis was canceled and swept under the rug. To this day, it remains one of the few Cheers spin-offs that nobody talks about, not even in those nostalgic "Where Are They Now?" specials. It is the sitcom equivalent of a failed family reunion. You show up, say hello, eat some bad pasta, and leave early. And honestly, that might be the best way to remember it. As a bizarre little blip in the golden era of sitcoms, a reminder that sometimes the joke should stay at the bar and not follow you all the way to Las Vegas. So this one barely counts as a spin-off, but it aired, it happened, and if you blinked in 1977, you probably missed it. Sanford Arms was the short-lived continuation of Sanford and Son, one of the most beloved sitcoms of the 1970s. But there was one massive problem. Neither Sanford nor Son were in it. After Red Fox left the show, the network scrambled to fill the gap. They figured they could use the same set, same neighborhood, and just build something new around it. The idea was that Fred Sanford had moved to Arizona, sold his house, and now it was a boarding house run by his old friend, Phil Wheeler. That was the plan. The result was a confused sitcom that barely resembled the classic it came from. The characters were new, the energy was off, and the magic gone. Sanford and Son worked because of Red Fox's timing, his chemistry with Lamont, and the raw grit of their dynamic. Take that away, and all you have left is a hollow shell of jokes that do not land. The show tried to keep some familiar faces, like Grady and Bubba, but without Fred anchoring the scenes, they just wandered around like extras who lost their lines. The comedy was softer. The rhythm was slower. It felt like the studio knew they were out of gold and just kept panning the river anyway. Viewers were not fooled. The ratings dropped immediately. Only 4 episodes aired before it was pulled from the schedule. And even among hardcore Sanford and Son fans, it is rarely mentioned. It is honestly kind of heartbreaking. Because this show had all the tools, existing audience, built-in setting, network backing, but it just did not have the spark. And without that spark, even the best sitcom formula collapses. What is left now is a strange footnote. A spin-off without a star, a sitcom without a soul, and a lesson that if you build a new house on the ashes of a classic, you better make sure there is something worth living in, because Sanford Arms was abandoned before anyone could even unpack their bags. You remember Flo, right? That brassy, no-nonsense waitress from Alice who made "Kiss My Grits" a national catchphrase? She was fire. She was attitude. She was the kind of side character who stole every scene she walked into. So naturally, the network figured, hey, why not give her her own show? And thus, Flo was born. The pitch sounded decent. Flo leaves Mel's diner and heads back to her Texas hometown to buy a rundown roadhouse and turn it into a successful honky-tonk. It had all the makings of a quirky small-town sitcom. But what worked in a busy diner in Phoenix did not quite translate to a sleepy Texas roadside bar. Without her old crew around, Flo's wit started to feel more like noise. The supporting cast was forgettable, the stories meandered, and the chemistry that had made Alice fun to watch never clicked here. They tried to give her quirky neighbors, crusty regulars, and some heartwarming moments, but none of it stuck. The grit felt forced, the charm felt thin. Even Polly Holliday, who was wildly talented, seemed like she was straining to carry it all. Every episode tried to wring magic out of thin air, but there was only so far her one-liners could go. After the novelty wore off, audiences just moved on. The show limped through 2 seasons but lost steam fast. Critics were cold, viewers cooled, and just like that, Flo went from a breakout star to a forgotten lead. The irony? She went back to Alice in reruns, and people welcomed her like she had never left. Maybe that is the lesson. Sometimes the sidekick is perfect exactly where she is. And when you try to bottle that lightning twice, all you get is a flicker. Reggie is one of those shows where you watch 5 minutes and start asking, wait, what is this supposed to be? It was a spin-off, technically, an American remake of a British sitcom called The Fall and Rise of Reginald Perrin. The problem? They took a sharp, biting satire and sanded it down into a bland, polite shrug of a show. Reggie was a middle-aged man stuck in a boring job, trapped in a life he could not stand, and slowly losing his grip. In the UK version, it was dark. It was weird. It was funny in that brutally honest way only the British seem to nail. In the American version, it was just uncomfortable. Richard Mulligan played the lead, and honestly, he did his best. But the writing had no teeth. The existential dread of the original was replaced with watered-down suburban awkwardness. It wanted to be a commentary on the emptiness of the American dream, but it did not want to upset anyone while saying it. So instead of edge, you got sighs, long pauses, weak jokes, and a plotline about a man who fakes a breakdown just to escape his 9-to-5 life, except it's presented like a mid-week sitcom about burnt toast and boring dinner parties. Audiences were confused, critics shrugged, and NBC pulled the plug almost immediately. Only 6 episodes aired before Reggie disappeared forever. It is hard to imagine a show with that much potential falling so flat. But that is what happens when you try to adapt a voice without understanding its tone. Reggie was not just forgotten, it was barely even noticed. which is kind of fitting in a sad way. A show about a man who felt invisible became invisible itself. Goldie Hawn's Private Benjamin was a hit movie. Funny, sharp, full of sass and heart, it took a spoiled socialite and threw her into the chaos of military life. Watching her figure it out? Comedy gold. So when they decided to make it a television show, expectations were high. Too high, maybe. Lorna Patterson stepped into the lead role for the series, and while she gave it her all, the shadow of Goldie was just too big. The show tried to recreate the movie's fish-out-of-water formula. Only stretched out across multiple episodes, it lost its punch. The military hijinks started to feel repetitive. Every episode hit the same beats. Judy does not fit in, Judy learns a lesson, Judy survives another day in olive drab. The supporting characters were cookie-cutter, and the edge that made the movie so fun was dulled into something safer. They did try to address some real issues, gender roles in the military, leadership dynamics, but it was all packaged inside standard sitcom fluff. Laugh tracks filled the gaps where wit should have gone. And by the second season, it was clear the novelty had worn off. There were glimpses of what could have been. Some solid performances, a few surprisingly thoughtful episodes. But without Goldie Hawn's charm and timing, the whole thing felt like a knockoff handbag. You could recognize the logo, but the stitching was off. After 2 seasons, Private Benjamin was honorably discharged from the airwaves. Ratings dipped, interest faded, and the show quietly marched out of television history. It is not the worst spin-off ever made, but it is a textbook case of why lightning rarely strikes twice. You can copy the look, the name, even the plot, but you cannot manufacture the magic. And once it is gone, it is just another uniform in a sea of forgettable sitcoms. This one had everything on paper: helicopters, explosions, high-tech gear, and a big-name movie to back it up. Blue Thunder was based on the 1983 film of the same name, which had been a gritty, high-stakes thriller about government surveillance and police overreach. It was tense, it was cool, it had edge. The show, though? Not so much. Instead of suspense, you got a glossy, neutered action series that felt like it was playing dress-up. The movie's intensity got swapped out for cheesy dialogue and overused aerial footage. The cast tried their best. James Ferrantino led the squad, and even Dana Carvey was there, pre-Saturday Night Live. But no amount of charisma could fix what felt like a helicopter without a flight plan. The main problem? It was boring. For a show about a high-tech combat chopper patrolling the skies of Los Angeles, not a lot actually happened. Episodes dragged, plots blurred together, and the helicopter, the whole reason people tuned in, was rarely used in any way that mattered. It also aired at a time when networks were trying to cash in on every action franchise they could get their hands on. Blue Thunder ended up looking like a dollar store version of Airwolf, which premiered the exact same year, except Airwolf had mystery, style, and a way better theme song. By mid-season, the writing was on the wall. The ratings dipped, the critics were unimpressed, and Blue Thunder went down in flames after just 11 episodes. No one talks about it now. It is one of those shows that slips right out of pop culture memory, even for people who watched TV religiously in the 1980s, which is wild considering it came from a hit movie. But that is the thing. Style without substance? That does not fly, no matter how many rotors you bolt on. You ever watch a character in a show and think, this guy is great, but only in small doses? That was Harry McGraw, a loudmouth, streetwise private eye who popped up in episodes of Murder, She Wrote, and made just enough of a mess to be charming. So naturally, someone gave him his own series, and that is where it all started to unravel. The Law and Harry McGraw tried to blend hard-boiled detective stories with sitcom-style banter. Jerry Orbach, who later became a legend on Law and Order, played Harry. He was good, real good. But the show was not. The cases were dull, the dialogue was padded, and the chemistry between McGraw and his no-nonsense attorney partner, Ellie McGinnis, was more awkward than electric. It wanted to be witty, it wanted to be sharp, but it landed somewhere between Matlock and a phone book. The formula got tired fast. McGraw gets in trouble, Ellie bails him out, they sort of flirt, and the case wraps up with a shrug. It felt like watching a rerun of a show you had not seen the first time around. It did not help that it aired on CBS in the shadow of much better crime dramas. And while Murder, She Wrote had that cozy, small-town mystery vibe, Harry McGraw was just gritty without charm. It was like drinking lukewarm coffee, technically functional, but who wants it? The show lasted just over a dozen episodes before getting quietly canceled. Jerry Orbach returned to guest star on Murder, She Wrote a few more times, like nothing had happened. These days, most people do not even know The Law and Harry McGraw was a thing. And sometimes that is the worst kind of failure, not the loud kind, the forgettable kind. Before there was Veronica Mars or Jessica Jones, there was Cassie and Company, sort of. This short-lived detective drama starred Angie Dickinson as Cassie Holland, a sharp, stylish private investigator balancing her job, her daughter, and her ex-husband. On paper, it was promising. On screen, not quite. The show wanted to have it all: grit, sass, mystery, and family drama. But what it ended up with was a clunky mix that could not find its footing. Cassie was written to be smart and tough, but half the time the plots gave her nothing to do but react to other people's bad decisions. And for a lead character with that much screen time, she barely left a mark. Episodes were formulaic and the pacing felt weirdly slow. The cases were forgettable. The personal drama lacked punch. And even though Angie Dickinson was a proven star from her policewoman days, the show did not seem to trust her with real material. You could feel the network second-guessing the tone episode by episode. Was it a gritty procedural? A lighthearted drama? A soap with a trench coat? No one seemed to know. And that uncertainty made it hard for audiences to care. It aired quietly in 1982, got mediocre reviews, and vanished before it had a chance to build anything meaningful. Which is a shame. Because you could tell Cassie & Co. was trying to do something different, center a strong, capable woman in a role usually reserved for grizzled men in raincoats. But trying was all it did. It never became anything more than an idea with a network slot. It lasted less than one season. Barely anyone remembers it now. And if they do, it is usually just a vague memory of Angie Dickinson wearing nice coats. Some shows go out in a blaze of glory. This one just went out quietly, like a case closed with no real ending. The Texas Wheelers was a sitcom that aired for a blink in time, just 4 episodes in 1974 before it disappeared from the airwaves. It told the story of a widowed father, Zach Wheeler, played by Jack Elam, trying to raise his 4 kids in rural Texas after returning home. The tone was rough around the edges but warm at the core, an unusual blend of grit and sentiment. One of the kids was played by a young Mark Hamill just before the world would know him as Luke Skywalker. But even that bit of trivia was not enough to save the show. It premiered during a time when audiences were craving escapism, not slice-of-life realism wrapped in Southern grit. The laugh track felt out of place. The characters talked more than they joked. There was a quiet honesty in every scene, moments that felt like they came from someone's real life, not a writer's room. The show made no effort to dazzle or distract. It just wanted to sit with you and tell the truth. It was less about punchlines and more about pauses, silences, and hard-earned smiles. And instead of punchlines, there were long, quiet moments of reflection. Maybe too many. The Texas Wheelers did not fail because it was bad. It failed because it was honest. And in 1974, honest sitcoms did not get very far. But those who remember it remember something rare. A network show that tried to say something deeper under its dusty boots and denim jackets. It had an emotional backbone. It wanted to show how family bonds are messy, complicated, and not always tied together with a neat bow. Its cancellation felt like closing the book before the first chapter was over. Yet in those few episodes, there was something sincere, something that lingers, the kind of sincerity that could only be appreciated years later. Marty Feldman was impossible to forget. Those wide eyes, that surreal humor, that presence. Already a star in Britain, Feldman brought his signature style to American television in the Marty Feldman Comedy Machine. It was a sketch show that took absurdity seriously. The pace was fast, the visuals wild, and the tone unapologetically weird. Feldman was the kind of performer who could turn nonsense into poetry, if you were willing to go along for the ride. But American audiences in the early 1970s were not quite ready for it. The show was a whirlwind of bizarre sketches, musical numbers, and animated interludes. One moment he was impersonating a dictator in a tutu, the next he was playing chess with a chicken. It had more in common with Monty Python than with anything on American prime time. And that was the problem. The cultural gap was just a little too wide. Audiences were used to the familiar rhythm of variety shows, not the frenetic chaos of British surrealism. Viewers were confused, advertisers were wary, critics admired Feldman's genius but questioned the format's accessibility. Despite strong backing and an ambitious slate of episodes, the comedy machine sputtered out after just one season. Feldman would go on to have success in films, especially with roles like Igor in Young Frankenstein. But this television experiment became more of a cult curiosity than a breakthrough. Today, it is a relic of creative risk, a show that swung for the fences and missed, but missed in a way that still dazzles. Not all brilliance lands. Sometimes it just flashes once and vanishes. Before Bill and Ted jumped through history, there was Voyagers. And while it might not have had air guitars or catchphrases, it had something just as fun. An ex-pirate-looking time traveler named Phineas Fogg and a whip-smart 11-year-old named Jeffrey who traveled through time fixing historical mistakes. Yes, this was a real show. And yes, it was kind of amazing. The premise was simple. Time is a mess, and these two have to fix it. Armed with nothing but a pocket-sized device called the Omni, they would jump into different eras: ancient Egypt, the Wild West, the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and make sure history stayed on track. But it was not just history class with costumes. It was adventure, humor, big 80s energy. Phineas Fogg was all charm and leather vests. He was not the brightest, but he had heart. Jeffrey, on the other hand, was the brains, a walking encyclopedia who actually knew when the Civil War started and why Thomas Edison mattered. Together, they were a perfect team, accidentally landing in the wrong century, arguing, improvising, and always somehow making things right just in time. Think Doctor Who, but American. And with a lot more jumping out of windows. What made Voyagers special was that it actually taught you something. At the end of each episode, a narrator would say, "If you want to learn more, check it out at your local library." That was the whole vibe. Sneaky education wrapped in time travel chaos. And somehow, it worked. Kids tuned in for sword fights and airships and left with random facts about Marie Antoinette. It was chaotic good. Of course, it was not perfect. The budget showed. Some of the sets looked more like a school play than a Hollywood backlot, and the plots could get a little wild. But none of that mattered. The heart was there, the fun was there, and the chemistry between Fogg and Jeffrey, solid gold. It only lasted one season, 18 episodes. Then, just like a time traveler who lost his Omni, it disappeared. But the impact? Still there. For a generation of kids, Voyagers was the reason they knew who Galileo was. It made learning cool for a minute, and that alone makes it unforgettable. It was messy, meaningful, and full of wonder, and that is exactly why it is too good to forget. The Colgate Comedy Hour was not just another variety show, it was an event. Airing live from 1950 to 1955, it brought the electric chaos of the stage directly into the homes of millions. Hosted by a rotating cast of comedy legends like Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis, Eddie Cantor, and Abbott and Costello, the show captured a kind of energy that no scripted sitcom ever could. It was unpredictable, unpolished, and wildly entertaining. Every week was a gamble, a new experiment in whether or not the comedians could top their last performance. And more often than not, they did. It was a golden age of television in the raw, where mistakes happened on air and the audience loved it more for that. You felt the tension in every live performance. Anything could go wrong. and sometimes it did. But that chaos made it human, alive, and impossible to turn away from. It was the only place where you could see slapstick, song, and celebrity all within the same breath. And at its best, it felt like the whole country was in on the joke at the same time. The competition with The Ed Sullivan Show was fierce, and at times it looked like Colgate might actually win. But time plays favorites, and while Ed Sullivan became immortal, Colgate Comedy Hour became something else, a memory. It disappeared almost as suddenly as it had arrived, leaving only clips and scattered references behind. Yet for those who watched it, those Sunday nights were unforgettable. You did not just laugh. You roared. You shouted across the room. You felt alive. It was theater, comedy, and chaos wrapped into 1 hour of brilliance. You would think that turning one of the most successful comedies of all time into a television show would be a sure thing. But Delta House proved just how quickly lightning can escape the bottle. Based on the hit movie Animal House, this series tried to translate the chaos, raunch, and rebellion of the big screen into a weekly sitcom, only now under the watchful eye of network censors. And it showed. Gone were the wild parties, the edge, and the sense of danger. What remained was a watered-down echo of what once made people howl with laughter. Some of the original cast returned, including John Vernon as the uptight Dean Wormer, but without John Belushi's magnetic presence, the show felt like a tribute act. The humor was neutered. The stories went nowhere. ABC hoped that the mere association with the movie would be enough to draw in fans, but those fans were not fooled. This was not the Animal House they remembered. Ratings started strong but fell quickly. The characters, once riotous and wild, now felt flat and safe. Within 13 episodes, the show was off the air. Critics called it forgettable. Even the network seemed eager to move on. Delta House became another example of how television sometimes strangles the very spirit it hopes to bottle. You cannot fake irreverence, and you definitely cannot sanitize rebellion. Today, it is a curiosity, remembered mostly by die-hard fans and trivia buffs, a show that tried to cash in on chaos and wound up lost in the quiet. There are sitcoms that make sense, and then there is Jennifer Slept Here. The title alone sounds like a line from a haunted hotel review. But no, it was a real show, on television, in 1983. And the plot? A famous Hollywood actress dies, comes back as a ghost, and decides to haunt her old house, which is now being rented by a normal suburban family from New York. And instead of being scary, she becomes best friends with their teenage son. Because why not? Jennifer the Ghost is glamorous, sassy, and completely stuck in the afterlife. She is invisible to everyone but the teenage son, Joey, which leads to exactly the kind of chaos you would expect. Talking to thin air during dinner, floating objects, lessons about believing in yourself from someone who is technically dead. The show was half ghost story, half coming-of-age comedy, and somehow it worked. Now, this was not your typical spooky show. No fog machines or jump scares, just lots of early 80s charm, a laugh track, and Jennifer materializing in sparkly outfits to give Joey life advice. She was more like a fairy godmother in shoulder pads. And the show leaned into that weirdness completely. It never tried to explain why Joey was the only one who could see her. It just shrugged and said, "Yeah, that is how it is," and then rolled with it. What made it special was the tone. It could have been creepy, but it was warm, sweet even. Jennifer was funny, sarcastic, but ultimately wanted to help. And Joey was just a kid trying to navigate growing up, made infinitely harder by the fact that his only real confidant was a literal ghost. But somehow, the emotional beats landed. There were moments where Jennifer would miss being alive, and Joey would try to comfort her. It was oddly moving for a sitcom with floating lamps. The show only lasted one season. Maybe the world was not ready for a ghost buddy comedy, or maybe it just got lost in the shuffle of louder, more predictable shows. But people who watched it, they remember. The sparkle, the sass, the ghost with a heart of gold. Jennifer Slept Here was weird in the best possible way. Like a bedtime story gone sideways, and that is exactly why it is too good to forget. Baywatch Nights was a spin-off that should have never worked, and in the end, it didn't. Airing from 1995 to 1997, it began as a detective drama starring David Hasselhoff's character from Baywatch, now moonlighting as a private investigator. But somewhere along the way, someone had a wild idea. What if it was supernatural? By its second season, the show had shifted into full X-Files territory, with Hasselhoff chasing ghosts, sea monsters, and other unexplainable threats under the moonlight. The tone was bizarre, the writing even more so. And while Baywatch thrived on sun and surf, Baywatch Nights traded it for fog machines and fear. Audiences were baffled. There were alien conspiracies, demon possessions, and episodes that felt like fever dreams. It was less a spin-off and more a genre-bending experiment in identity crisis. But hidden inside that chaos was a wild kind of courage, to throw everything safe away and start again. The camp factor went through the roof, but without the self-awareness to pull it off. Still, it tried. It tried to be different, to evolve, to turn a sun-soaked brand into something shadowy and strange. But that leap was too big. Ratings plummeted, and by 1997, it was quietly canceled, swallowed by the very darkness it tried to explore. Today, it exists more as trivia than memory, a weird side note in the legacy of one of the most watched shows in television history. But there's something oddly admirable about it. It dared to transform, to chase the unknown. And even if it stumbled, it did so with conviction. There was a time when a television pitch like 5 fun-loving guys on a houseboat was enough to greenlight an entire series. That was the case with the San Pedro Beach Bums, a comedy about a group of carefree men navigating life, friendship, and misadventure from their floating home off the coast of Southern California. ABC hoped the easygoing vibe would charm audiences, offering something breezy and light in contrast to the heavier dramas of the time. But the result was a show that felt as aimless as its characters. The cast was likable, if underdeveloped. Each episode centered around antics that rarely built into anything memorable. Pranks, misunderstandings, and goofball schemes were the main menu items. It was a series that chased laughs without ever really earning them. The humor was broad, the stakes low. Even the location, a picturesque beach setting, felt underused. And with so many characters sharing the spotlight, no one truly stood out. Viewers tuned in expecting a blend of the Monkees and Happy Days. What they got was a sitcom without structure, floating from episode to episode without any clear direction. Critics called it lightweight and forgettable. Ratings were lukewarm. After just 10 episodes, the Bums were evicted from the network's lineup. Okay, let me say this with a straight face. There was a television show in the 80s about a suburban dad who built a robot in his garage and then passed her off as his daughter, and she lived in the house, went to school, wore pigtails, talked in a monotone voice, and had super strength. This was Small Wonder, and somehow it worked. The robot girl's name was Vicky. That is short for Voice Input Child Identicant. She looked like a real child, but she spoke like a calculator and blinked slower than dial-up internet. Sure, there were episodes about almost getting caught, but most of the time, this was just a normal sitcom about raising kids, except one of the kids was made of wires and microchips. The show was odd, no doubt. There were genuine moments where Vicky would try to understand human feelings or help her human brother with his problems. It had that weird 80s tone where bizarre science fiction met heartfelt family comedy. And somehow, instead of crashing and burning, it became a household favorite. Vicky would lift a couch with one arm, but the strings holding it up were visible if you looked closely enough. The laugh track hit even when no one said anything funny. It felt homemade, like a school play where everyone gave it their all. And kids loved it. It gave them a world where weird was welcome. A machine could learn to love, especially in a decade filled with glossy perfection and cable networks trying to sell you on cool. Small Wonder went the other way. It said, "Hey, your weird family? It is okay. In fact, it is wonderful." It ran for 4 seasons, which is practically forever in weird sitcom years, but ask someone about it today and you will either get blank stares or instant joy. small wonder was a glitch in the matrix, and that is exactly why it is too good to forget. You ever hear a show's premise and just stop what you are doing to make sure you heard it right? That is Automan, a crime-fighting hologram created by a government programmer in his spare time. Not a robot, not an android. A glowing, neon walking hologram in a glowing blue suit with perfect hair and a smirk that said, "Yes, I am from the future and also somehow from a shampoo commercial." That was the 80s for you. The Bigalow Theater was one of those brief glimmers in television history that seemed to burn too brightly and too fast. Airing from 1950 to 1951, it lived a strange dual life, first as a CBS anthology drama and later repackaged for Dumont under various names. At its core, it was a stage for stories, real ones, deep ones, sometimes even a little too ambitious for their times. Each episode was a self-contained play, complete with rising tension and dramatic conclusions that tried to stretch the television format beyond its early limits. But here's what sets it apart: the talent it attracted. A young James Dean appeared on it before he became legend. George C. Scott showed up long before anyone called him iconic. For one brief, shining moment, the Bigalow Theater was a springboard for greatness. It was the kind of show that didn't just cast actors, it captured them at the edge of becoming icons. There was a rawness in the performances, a feeling that no one quite knew they were making history. Every episode felt like a rehearsal for something much bigger, but no less sincere. And because of that, it became a quiet archive of American talent right before it exploded. But it never quite caught the public's imagination in the way its network hoped. It lacked flash. It asked its viewers to pay attention, to feel something. That was a lot to ask from a post-war America that just wanted to laugh or sing. And so it faded, quietly, almost politely, into television's attic of forgotten names. But those performances, those early, trembling moments of greatness, they remain buried in dusty kinescopes, just waiting for someone to remember. There was a time when The Starlost was supposed to be a game changer, a Canadian-American science fiction epic created by legendary author Harlan Ellison. It promised something rare for television in the early 1970s, a deep, thoughtful exploration of humanity's future. The premise was solid. Earth had been destroyed. The last of humanity lived aboard a gigantic space ark, divided into sealed biospheres, each preserving a different culture. But the execution? That was another story entirely. Everything that could go wrong did. The budget was slashed early in production. Sets were cheap, effects were amateurish, dialogue dragged on endlessly, and characters stumbled through episodes that felt like half-finished thoughts. Ellison was so disillusioned he removed his name from the credits. What was meant to be a rich, compelling universe became a series of dimly lit rooms filled with awkward pacing and empty revelations. Viewers who tuned in expecting the next Star Trek found themselves stranded in a slow-moving dream where nothing ever really happened. Ratings fell, critics turned cold, and by the end of its short run, just 16 episodes, The Starlost had become a cautionary tale, a reminder that big ideas are not enough without the tools to bring them to life. It remains a fascinating failure. It is the kind of show that leaves behind more questions than answers, and perhaps that is why some still seek it out today. Not to enjoy it, but to witness the fall of something that could have been great, a star that never quite made it into orbit. If you ever wondered what would happen if you gave a group of science experiments their own Saturday morning cartoon, but made it live action, this is that show. Misfits of Science was NBC's chaotic attempt to ride the superhero wave before anyone really figured out what made superheroes click on television. It was messy, loud, kind of brilliant, definitely weird, and somehow way better than it had any right to be. The premise was like someone threw darts at a comic book and decided, let us just use everything. There was a guy who could shoot lightning out of his hands, a telekinetic rock and roll girl who just wanted to live a normal life, a huge basketball player who could shrink to the size of a toaster, and then you had the one normal guy, Billy, the scientist wrangling them all together. But it did not matter, because Misfits of Science was a ride, not a lecture. Now, watching it today, you might feel like someone poured neon paint on your television and turned the dialogue up to 11. The pacing was wild. Sometimes they saved lives, and then you would blink and suddenly someone was flying a dune buggy into a wall while screaming about lasers. But beneath all that chaos was something really sincere. These characters were outcasts, weirdos. It was a very 80s kind of storytelling, using absurd setups to explore real emotional beats. Not with lectures, but with lightning bolts and heart. The show only ran for one season. That was it. 13 episodes and done. But it left fingerprints all over pop culture. Plus, it had a young Courtney Cox before Friends, just doing her thing like it was totally normal to be a psychic in a leather jacket. Misfits of Science was ridiculous, heartfelt, and light years ahead of the curve, and that is exactly why it is too good to forget. It's a Living had a simple premise. 6 waitresses working at a swanky restaurant on top of a Los Angeles skyscraper, juggling tips, tough customers, and each other. It ran for nearly a decade, first on ABC and then in syndication, from 1980 to 1989. But despite its long life, it somehow fell through the cracks of television history. Maybe it was because the cast changed more than once. Maybe it was because people did not know how to market a show that was about working women, but not as flashy as Charlie's Angels or as dramatic as Dynasty. It was funny, it was sharp, and it gave voice to the struggles of service workers in a way few sitcoms ever have. These were not rich characters. They were real. They clocked in tired, left exhausted, and still found reasons to laugh in between. Each joke landed because it came from a place of lived-in truth, not punchline formulas. The show was less about drama and more about dignity. They argued, supported each other, and occasionally broke down in the break room. The comedy came from the grind, the awkward tables, the demanding guests, the tired feet. And while it had plenty of laughs, it never made fun of their lives. It respected them. That quiet dignity is why It's a Living still resonates with the people who remember it. But syndication does strange things to memory. Shows become familiar, but fuzzy, important, but unspecific. It lived in reruns and then disappeared. And now, it is a name people say with a vague sense of recognition, like something they dreamed about once. But behind that name was something brave, something real, something that showed working women without glamour, but with grit. What if you took Annie, mashed it with the Brady Bunch, then threw in spontaneous musical numbers sung in full costume? That is Rags to Riches, a show that asked, what if orphans could sing doo-wop every time they had a feeling? And for some reason, the answer worked, at least for a little while. The story goes like this. A self-made millionaire named Nick Foley unexpectedly ends up adopting 6 orphan girls from the 1960s and tries to raise them in his mansion. Except he is not exactly the soft-hearted type. He is gruff, impatient, allergic to sentiment, but over time, of course, they all warm up to each other. That would have been a solid family sitcom right there. But Rags to Riches goes further, way further, because at least once or twice an episode, the girls burst into song. Not just humming. Full-blown musical performances using reworded versions of classic pop hits to match whatever emotional situation they were in. You would think this would be a gimmick, and it kind of was. But the wild part? It had real heart. The show somehow balanced the over-the-top charm of musical fantasy with grounded stories about family, trust, and identity. These were kids who had lost everything. And suddenly they were navigating prep schools, fancy parties, and emotional roller coasters, all while singing about it. The performances were cheesy, sure, but full of joy. The cast gave it their all, whether they were dealing with a school bully or dancing through a heartbreak. And the music? Catchy, sometimes weirdly perfect. Somehow, Stop, in the Name of Love became a heartfelt cry about being accepted. It was bizarre and oddly brilliant. Rags to Riches only ran for 2 seasons. It never quite found its audience, maybe because it lived between too many genres. But the people who watched it never forgot, because it dared to be something strange and sentimental at the same time. It wore its emotions on its sleeve and then sang them at you. Rags to Riches was one part musical, one part sitcom, and all parts heartfelt chaos. And that is exactly why it is too good to forget. If any of these spin-offs made you cringe or go, "No way," drop your strangest TV memory below, hit like, and subscribe for more forgotten gems.